5:30 in the morning. The alarm cuts through the darkness of the bedroom, and Evelyn Winters is already awake. She has been awake for 20 minutes, lying perfectly still beside a man whose breathing is deep and even, the kind of sleep that comes to people who do not carry what she carries. The alarm is a formality, a performance. She reaches over, slowly turns it off before the second beep moves with the practiced efficiency of someone who has learned that sudden movements in the early hours can change the temperature of an entire day. The bedroom is dim, pale light from the street filtering through curtains that Colton bought 3 years ago, heavy fabric in a color he called sophisticated and she called gray. She slides out of bed, feet finding the floor without sound. Her body has learned this choreography: how to dress in the dark, how to move through a room without disturbing the air, how to make herself smaller, quieter, less present. In the bathroom, she turns on the shower and waits for the water to warm. The mirror shows her what she already knows: 33 years old, dark hair that used to shine and now just exists, eyes that learned somewhere along the way to show nothing at all. And there on her left forearm, just below where the sleeve of her uniform will cover bruises, 4 of them, oval, dark purple at the centers, yellowing at the edges, the size and shape of fingers, a grip. She does not look at them long. Looking invites questions she stopped asking herself a long time ago. Instead, she steps into the shower and lets the water run hot enough to hurt, which is the only thing that feels like anything anymore. Harper is still sleeping when Eve finishes dressing. 7:45, 15 minutes before they need to leave. Eve stands in the doorway of her daughter's room and watches her breathe. 8 years old, brown hair spread across the pillow, one arm hanging off the edge of the bed, fingers curled around nothing. In sleep, Harper looks exactly like what she is: a child, safe, unaware. During the day, it is different. During the day, Harper has eyes that see too much, and a way of going quiet when Colton raises his voice that breaks something in Eve every single time. But here now, in the early morning stillness, her daughter is just a little girl, dreaming about horses and art projects and whatever small, perfect things fill the minds of children who should not have to know what Harper knows. Eve crosses the room, sits on the edge of the bed, touches her daughter's shoulder gently. "Harper," she says, "time to get up, sweetheart." Harper stirs, opens her eyes, focuses on her mother's face. For a moment, just a moment, there is nothing in the world except the two of them. Then Harper sits up, rubs her eyes, and the day begins. They move through the morning routine in comfortable silence. Cereal, orange juice, Harper's backpack checked for homework, lunchbox packed with a sandwich and apple slices, and the granola bar Harper likes. Eve helps her daughter tie her shoes, smooths her hair, looks into her face, and tries to see some version of a future where mornings do not feel like survival. "You okay?" Mama Harper asks. "I'm okay, baby. You ready for school?" Harper nods, then quieter. Is he awake? Not yet. The relief on her daughter's face is so clear, so immediate, that Eve has to look away. They leave the house at 8:15. Colton is still asleep upstairs. The truck is still in the driveway. Eve's car, at a 1998 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a check engine light that has been on for 6 months, starts on the third try. She drives Harper to school, watches her walk through the front doors of Harrow Creek Elementary, waits until she is safely inside before pulling away. Then she drives to Ruby's Diner, 4 blocks down Main Street, past the hardware store, past the pharmacy, past the Methodist church with its cheerful marquee sign, and the barber shop that has had the same owner for 27 years. The town is waking up slowly. A few cars, a few people. The kind of morning that looks from a distance like peace. Ruby's Diner sits slightly back from the road. Gravel parking lot, hand-painted sign that has faded just enough to look permanent. The building itself is small, sturdy, the kind of place that has been here long enough to feel like it has always been here. Inside, the walls are painted a particular shade of yellow that Ruby herself mixed 11 years ago before the cancers took her, before her daughter kept the name and the recipes in that color that never quite matched anything in a paint catalog, but had somehow become the most comforting color in the county. Eve parks in her usual spot, sits in the car for 30 seconds, breathes. Then she gets out, walks to the entrance, and steps into the warm smell of coffee and bacon and biscuits baking in the oven. Iris Tate is already at the register counting bills from yesterday's till. "Morning, Eve," she says without looking up. "Morning." Eve ties her apron, checks a coffee station, begins the work she has been doing 6 days a week for the past 6 years. By 9 o'clock, the diner is half full. The regulars have their spots. Augustus Merrick, called Gus by everyone who knows him, sits at the booth by the window with his crossword puzzle and his black coffee. Retired county road commissioner. 20 years in that job. Now he spends his mornings here working through the puzzle with a stubby pencil, rarely speaking, always tipping exactly 15%. The Carver brothers, Hank and Eli farmers who work together and argue about everything, occupy the foretop in the back corner. They order the same breakfast every single day. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, biscuits. They split the bill down the middle and tip exactly 12% no matter what the total comes to. It is a thing people notice and talk about and have stopped questioning. Eve knows their orders before they sit down. She knows that Gus's arthritis is bad when he holds his mug with both hands. She knows that Hank Carver likes his eggs over easy and his brother likes them scrambled. She knows the rhythm of this place the way some people know music. It is muscle memory, routine, the only thing in her life she can predict. She is refilling Gus's coffee when the door opens and a man she has never seen before walks in. He is older, 60, maybe 65, weathered face, gray beard, cropped short lines around his eyes that suggest a life spent outdoors. He wears a leather vest over a faded denim shirt, boots that have seen 1,000 miles, and he moves with the careful economy of someone who has learned not to waste motion. He scans the room once slowly, then walks to the back booth and sits down. Eve brings him a menu, sets it on the table, pulls out her order pad. "Coffee," she asks. "Black," he says. "And I'll take the biscuits with gravy." His voice is low, steady. Not unkind. She writes it down, turns to go. "Thank you," he says. She nods, walks back to the counter, pours the coffee, brings it to his table along with the biscuits when they are ready. He does not look up when she sets them down, just nods again. She leaves him alone. His name, she will learn later, is Garrett Stone. But on this morning, he is just another customer in a diner that sees 100 customers a week. She does not think about him after she walks away. She has tables to manage, orders to take, coffee to pour. The morning shifts into afternoon. The lunch rush comes and goes. Garrett Stone sits in his booth, finishes his meal, leaves cash on the table with a tip that is more than the meal cost, and walks out without saying a word. He does not come back that day, or the next, but on the third day he is there again. Same booth, same order, black coffee, biscuits with gravy, and this time when Eve brings him his food, she notices something. He is watching, not her exactly, the room, the people in it, the way they move and speak and interact, like someone reading a language only he can see. On the fourth day, she realizes he is watching her. It is not threatening, not the way Colton watches her when he is deciding whether to be angry. It is different, observational, like he is trying to understand something. She catches his eyes once briefly and looks away. Keeps moving, keeps working. On the fifth day, he moves to the counter. She is wiping down the surface when he sits down, settling onto one of the stools with the care of someone whose body has taken its share of punishment over the years. She brings him coffee without asking, sets it in front of him, waits. "My name's Garrett," he says. "Been coming in here about a week." She nods. "I know." Back booth, black coffee, biscuits with gravy. Something almost like a smile crosses his face. "That's right." There is a pause. Not awkward. Just a space where something could be said or not said. Then Garrett looks at her directly, not confrontationally, but with a kind of steady attention that makes her uncomfortable, because it is the first time in a very long time that anyone has looked at her and actually seen her. "I want you to know something," he says. I'll say it once, and then we can talk about the weather or nothing at all if you prefer. She waits, her hands are still. Her face is carefully neutral. The professional mask she has worn for so many years, it feels like a part of her skin. I see what's happening, Garrett says quietly, and you don't deserve it. Nobody does, but especially not you. The silence that follows lasts approximately 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, Evelyn Winters does something invisible to everyone else in the room. She nearly falls apart, just a fractional loosening around her eyes, a slight shift in her posture, the physical equivalent of a wall developing a crack. Then she pulls it back together with the practiced skill of someone who has been pulling herself together for years. I don't know what you're talking about, she says. Her voice is steady. She has practice. Okay, Garrett says. He does not push, does not argue, just nods once. I'm going to keep coming in here. If you ever want to talk, I'm a good listener. If you never do, that's fine too, but I'm not going anywhere. He takes a sip of his coffee, changes the subject to something meaningless. The weather, the biscuits, how long Ruby's has been here. Eve answers automatically, her mind elsewhere, and then she brings him his food and moves to the next table and the next customer, and the rest of her shift passes in the familiar blur of work that keeps her from thinking too hard about anything. But when her break comes, she goes to the small room in the back, where the staff keeps their belongings, sits down in a folding chair, and stares at the wall for 4 minutes. She tries very hard not to feel anything. It is what she has trained herself to do, what she needs to do to survive. But today, it is not working as well as usual, because someone had seen her. Not the bruises, not the weight loss, or the careful way she moves, or the practiced smile. Her, the person underneath all of it. And that recognition, that simple moment of being seen, has opened something in her chest that she cannot quite close again. The thing about violence is that it does not arrive all at once. It happens in increments. Evelyn Winters met Colton Wade at a summer barbecue 6 years ago. She was 27, new to Harrow Creek, working at Ruby's for 8 months, and starting to feel like maybe this was a place she could put down roots. The barbecue was at someone's farm outside town, one of those community gatherings where everyone brought something, and the afternoon stretched into evening, and people who barely knew each other found reasons to laugh. Colton was there with his crew from the construction company. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fills a room just by walking into it. He smiled at her across the yard, came over, introduced himself, asked her questions about where she was from and what brought her to Harrow Creek and whether she liked it here. He listened to her answers, made her feel interesting, made her feel seen. He was attentive, funny, self-deprecating in a way that felt genuine. The first 6 months were good. He called when he said he would call, showed up when he said he would show up, took her to dinner at the nice restaurant 2 towns over, brought flowers, met Harper and was kind to her patient the way people are when they are trying to make a good impression, but you believe it is real because you want it to be real. Then came a raised voice during an argument about something small, an apology the next day, a period of extraordinary warmth that made her question whether the raised voice had been as bad as she remembered. Then a shove during another argument, more warmth, a gift, an expensive dinner, then something worse. And always an explanation, a version of events in which she had contributed somehow, said the wrong thing, been in the wrong mood, misunderstood something he had meant differently. He was under stress at work. His uncle was giving him trouble. The economy was affecting his business. She had caught him at a bad time. She needed to understand that he was doing the best he could. By the time the bruises started, she had been living inside his version of reality for so long that her own had become unreliable to her. She thought about leaving. Of course she did. The way the mind goes to a door and finds it locked. But then she thought about Harper, about a man with money and connections, about Deputy Miller who had responded to a call from the neighbors 14 months ago, looked at the broken lamp in the living room, listened to Colton's calm explanation about an accident, and left without filing a report, about the fact that she had no savings of her own. that the house they lived in was in Colton's name, that her family was 40 miles away in a town she had not visited in 2 years because isolation works slowly with plausible explanations. And by the time you realize it has happened, you are too far in to know how to climb back out. She was not weak. This needs to be said clearly, needs to be understood. There is nothing weak about surviving inside a situation that has been specifically designed to make surviving the only available option. What Evelyn Winters did every single day, getting up, getting her daughter ready for school, carrying plates and pouring coffee, and smiling at people who did not know and would not ask, that took more strength than most people will ever be called upon to demonstrate in their entire lives. She was waiting. She did not know for what exactly, just that she had not stopped, had not given up, had not let the situation take from her the one thing it wanted most, which was her belief that something someday might change. And that is when Garrett Stone sat down at the counter and told her quietly and without judgment that he saw what was happening. Garrett does not come back to Ruby's on Thursday or Friday morning. Eve notices his absence the way you notice when a sound you have grown accustomed to suddenly stops. She tells herself it does not matter, that he was just another customer, that whatever he thought he saw, he was wrong, or that he saw it and decided like everyone else that it was not his business, that getting involved would be complicated, that the cost of caring was higher than he was willing to pay. She has seen it before. People who notice, who almost say something, who look at her with questions in their eyes and then look away, because looking away is easier than looking directly at something that would require them to act. But Friday evening, everything changes. It is 6 o'clock, the dinner shift. Ruby's is busier than usual. Families, couples, the after-work crowd looking for something hot and filling before heading home. Eve is moving between tables, balancing plates, refilling drinks, when the door opens and Colton Wade walks in. He does not usually come to Ruby's, does not like the food, he says, does not like the atmosphere. But tonight he walks in and sits at the counter and orders coffee, and the room shifts in a way that only Eve can feel. A tightening, a pressure change. Iris looks up from the register, sees him, looks at Eve. Eve nods slightly. It's fine. She pours the coffee, brings it to him, sets it down. Thank you, baby, Colton says, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. Casual, familiar, possessive. She nods, turns to walk away. How was your day, he asks. Fine, good, that's good. He takes a sip of the coffee, makes a face. This is terrible. I'll make a fresh pot. Don't bother, I'm not staying. But he does stay for 20 minutes, sitting at the counter, making a performance of being unbothered, laughing too loud at something Iris says, asking Gus Merrick about his grandkids, radiating the ease of a man determined to show the room that he is not rattled, that everything is fine, that he is in control. When Eve refills his coffee, he looks up at her. The expression on his face is one she knows well. The one that says, I know what you did. We will discuss this later. She smiles, keeps moving, keeps the plates level. As he is leaving, Colton stops at the register, pulls out his wallet, leaves a $50 bill on the counter for a $3 cup of coffee. Keep the change, he says to Iris. Then louder so the room can hear. You might want to think about the kind of customers you're letting hang around here. Man's got a reputation, not the kind of place you want associated with good people. He does not look at Eve when he says it, does not need to. Everyone in the diner understands exactly what he means. Nobody says a word. Colton leaves. The diner goes silent, a collective held breath that no one acknowledges. And at the booth by the window, Augustus Merrick stares at his empty coffee cup and feels the particular shame of a man who knows exactly what the right thing would have been and knows with equal certainty that he is not going to do it. He is not alone in that feeling. The whole room has it, the weight of seeing something and choosing not to see it, the knowledge that something is wrong and the decision made silently and individually, but somehow collectively that it is not their problem. That getting involved would be complicated, That Colton Wade is the kind of man you do not cross in a town like Harrow Creek. Eve finishes her shift, cleans the tables, wipes down the counter, drives home in the dark. Colton's truck is in the driveway. The lights are on in the house. She sits in her car for 5 minutes, gathering herself, preparing, and then she goes inside. That night is bad, not the worst, but bad. She does not sleep. Around 3 in the morning, she gets out of bed, goes to the bathroom, looks at herself in the mirror. There is a new bruise forming on her upper arm. It will be fully developed by morning. She will wear long sleeves to cover it. She is so tired. Tired in a way that sleep cannot fix. Tired of being afraid. Tired of calculating every word, every gesture, every expression to avoid setting off a reaction she can no longer predict. Tired of living inside someone else's version of reality while her own dissolves a little more each day. But she goes back to bed, gets up when the alarm goes off, gets Harper ready for school, goes to work. Because that is what she does. That is what surviving looks like. Saturday morning. Eve is crossing the parking lot of Ruby's Diner 20 minutes before opening. The air is cold, thin autumn light slanting across the gravel. Inside, Iris is turning on the kitchen equipment, the familiar sounds, the ordinary rhythm of a day beginning. Eve is halfway to the door when she sees him. Garrett Stone, standing beside a motorcycle in the far corner of the lot, waiting. She stops, considers turning around, getting back in her car, driving away. But something keeps her feet where they are. Garrett does not move toward her, just stands there, patient. I heard about Friday night, he says, when she is close enough to hear. It was nothing. He was just Eve. She stops, the way he says her name. Not angry, not demanding, just at a statement. A request to be honest. I know you've been let down before, Garrett says. Someone promises to help. It gets complicated. They disappear, and you're still in the same place, except now Colton knows someone was asking around, and it's just worse. The accuracy of it lands in her chest like a stone dropping into still water. I'm not going to do that, Garrett says. You don't know what you're getting into. I know what Colton has. The uncle, the deputy, the contracts. I know exactly how he's protected himself here. Then you know I can't. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking you to let me. The morning is cold. The light is pale. Inside the diner, Iris is going through the motions of opening, completely disconnected from what is happening out here in the parking lot. Two separate worlds, two separate realities. You don't live here, Eve says. After whatever you're planning, you ride away. I'm the one who's still here. It is the most important point, the exact right question. And she can see in Garrett's face that he knows it. Then we make it so that staying is safe, he says. Not just for now, permanently. She studies him. This man she does not know, this stranger who has somehow seen past every defense she has built and decided that what he saw mattered enough to stay. To risk. To care. Why does this matter to you, she asks. You don't know me. Garrett is quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that holds weight. Then he says, I did know someone like you. A long time ago. He does not add anything more. Does not elaborate. Just lets it sit there. A door opened but not pushed through. Think about it, he says. I'll be in at 9. He walks to his motorcycle, swings his leg over, starts the engine. The sound cuts through the morning stillness, loud and rough and alive. He looks at her once more, nods, and then he rides away. Down the gravel lot, onto Main Street, gone. Eve stands there in the cold morning light, watching until he disappears. And something shifts inside her. Not trust, not entirely, not yet, but the very first loosening of the certainty she has carried for so long. The certainty that nobody was coming, that she was alone in this, that the only way out was a way she could not see and therefore did not exist. For the first time in 4 years, she allows herself to think the thought she has been too afraid to think. Maybe there is a way. She turns, walks into Ruby's, ties her apron, pours coffee, begins her shift. But the thought stays with her. Small, fragile, dangerous. A seed of something that feels almost like hope. Garrett Stone did not plan to ride into Harrow Creek and handle Colton Wade the way that part of his reputation might have suggested. This needs to be understood. He had lived 61 years and arrived at a knowledge that was hard-earned, the most expensive knowledge of his life. Violence solves exactly the problems that can be solved by violence and creates approximately 6 new ones in the process. He had seen what happened to men who made force their first instrument, from the inside, from the outside, from the uncomfortable middle distance of a man who had spent a long time learning the difference between power and force. Real power, the kind that changed things permanently, did not come from fists or threats or the ability to intimidate. It came from structures, systems, networks of support that could not be broken by a single act of retaliation. So instead of confrontation, Garrett made phone calls. The first call went to a woman named Catherine Holloway, who had been running a domestic violence advocacy network out of the county seat for 19 years. She knew every legal lever available in the state better than most attorneys, knew which judges were sympathetic and which ones needed to be avoided, knew how to navigate the gap between what the law promised and what it actually delivered to women in situations like Eve's. Garrett had helped with a fundraiser for her organization 3 years earlier. One of those facts about Garrett Stone that did not fit neatly into the reputation and so never got reported. He had shown up on his bike with 24 other members of the club, provided security, stayed late to help clean up, and written a check that Catherine had not expected and did not forget. When he called, she remembered. "Tell me what we're looking at," she said. He told her. The bruises, the pattern, the town that had decided collectively not to see, the uncle on the planning board, the deputy who had responded to a call and done nothing, the construction contracts that made Colton Wade feel untouchable. Catherine listened without interrupting. Then she said, "I can work with this, but she needs to be ready. Really ready, because once we start, we can't stop halfway, I know. And you understand that your part in this ends at a certain point. This has to be her decision, her voice, or it doesn't work. I understand. Good. Give me 48 hours. I'll pull together what we need." The second call went to Nathaniel Prescott, a lawyer who specialized in custody protection orders in situations where local law enforcement had demonstrated what Nathaniel diplomatically called inconsistent responsiveness. He was based 3 counties over, far enough from Harrow Creek that Colton Wade's connections meant nothing. Nathaniel had a reputation for taking cases other lawyers avoided, the complicated ones, the ones where the abuser had money or influence or both, where the system was more interested in preserving its own comfort than protecting the people it was supposed to serve. "What's the timeline?" Nathaniel asked after Garrett laid out the situation. "I don't know yet. She hasn't agreed to anything. But if she does, we need to move fast. Protection order first. Then we document everything, medical records if there are any, witnesses if we can find them, photographs, anything that establishes a pattern. Then we file in state court, bypass the local jurisdiction entirely. What about the child? That's the leverage point. He'll use the daughter to keep her in line. We need to secure custody before he knows what's happening. Can you do that?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Then if the evidence is there, yes. But I need her cooperation, full cooperation. No holding back because she's afraid or because she thinks she can manage it on her own. This only works if she trusts the process. I'll make sure she understands." The third call went to a man named Dalton, the same person who had given Garrett the initial information about Colton Wade. Dalton had lived in Harrow Creek for 15 years, knew the social architecture of the town, who owed who had power and who pretended to, what could be said and what could not. "I need names," Garrett said. "People who have seen what's happening. People who might be willing to say something if they knew it was safe." That's a short list. I don't need a long list. Just people with enough conscience left to feel bad about staying quiet. Dalton thought about it. "There's a guy named Gus Merrick. Used to be county commissioner. He's at the diner every morning, sees everything, never says anything, but I think it bothers him. Who else? The Carver brothers, Hank and Eli. They farmed together. Not exactly activists, but they're decent. Saw Colton grab her arm in the parking lot once. Talked about it between themselves, but never did anything about it. That's a start. Garrett, you know what you're asking, right? This town has decided Colton Wade is off limits. You're asking people to go against that. I'm asking them to do the right thing. Yeah, well, around here those aren't always the same thing. The fourth call went to a woman in the club who had rebuilt her own life after leaving a situation almost identical to Eve's. She lived 200 miles away, now had a job she liked, an apartment that was hers, and a restraint order that had not been violated in 6 years. Her name was Morgan, and she did not talk about what she had been through unless it was for a reason. You think she's ready? Morgan asked after Garrett explained. I don't know, but I think she's waiting for someone to tell her it's possible. Then tell her it's possible. And tell her it's going to be harder than she thinks. That leaving is just the beginning. That she's going to spend months, maybe years undoing the damage. But that it's worth it. That being safe is worth everything. Will you talk to her if she wants? Yeah, I'll talk to her. The fifth call went to a contact at a state agency that handled county planning irregularities. Garrett had met him years ago through circumstances that did not need explaining. The kind of connection that exists outside official channels, but proves useful when official channels are compromised. I'm going to send you some information, Garrett said, about a construction company in Harrow Creek. Contracts, bid processes, relationships between the owner and people on the planning board. What am I looking for? Anything that doesn't add up. And if I find something, then you do what you do. The man on the other end of the line was quiet for a moment. This about the waitress, word traveled fast. Yeah, you sure you want to go this route? Making enemies in small towns has a way of coming back around. I'm sure. All right, send me what you have. By the time Garrett finished the last call, it was late afternoon. The sky outside was gray, rain coming. He sat in the small motel room on the edge of town and thought about what he was building. Not a confrontation, a structure, a system of support and legal consequence that Colton Wade, with all his local insulation, could not simply intimidate away. It was the only way this worked. The only way that did not end with Garrett in jail and Eve still trapped and everything worse than before. He thought about his daughter, about the phone call 6 years ago that had come too late, about the things he should have seen and did not, about the man in Tennessee who had spent 3 years dismantling Sierra piece by piece while Garrett was on the road proud and distant and convinced that his children could handle their own lives because anything else felt like underestimating them. He had been wrong. Catastrophically wrong, and by the time he understood how wrong Sierra was in a hospital bed with her wrists bandaged and a look in her eyes that still 6 years later he could not think about without something breaking in his chest. She was safe now. She had done the long, hard work of putting herself back together. She had a husband who treated her with the kind of gentle respect that should be ordinary but felt to Garrett like a miracle. She had 2 children, a life. But the man who had hurt her was still out there somewhere, and Garrett carried that knowledge quietly, heavily, without ever fully setting it down. When he saw the bruises on Eve's arm, he saw Sierra, and he made a decision that he was not going to drive away this time. Tuesday afternoon, the coffee shop in Millfield, one town over from Harrow Creek. Generic franchise place with too bright lighting and chairs designed to be uncomfortable enough that people did not stay long. Garrett sat at a table near the back and waited. Eve arrived 10 minutes late, moving quickly, apologetically with Harper in tow. The girl was 8 years old, small for her age, with brown hair and a ponytail, and a backpack covered in stickers of horses. She looked at Garrett with the frank curiosity of children who have not yet learned to hide what they are thinking. Hi, Garrett said. Hi, Harper, said back. Eve pulled out a chair, helped Harper into the seat, set a paper placemat and a box of crayons in front of her. Harper immediately began drawing. Eve sat down across from Garrett and folded her hands on the table. Thank you for coming, Garrett said. I almost didn't, but you did. Yeah. She glanced at Harper, then back at Garrett. I don't know what I'm doing here. You're here because you're thinking about options. That's all this is. Information. You don't have to decide anything today. Eve nodded slowly. Okay. Garrett pulled a notebook from his jacket, opened it to a page where he had written names and numbers in his careful block handwriting. I've talked to some people, he said. A lawyer named Nathaniel Prescott. He specializes in cases like yours. Protection orders, custody, situations where the local system isn't working the way it should. He lives here 3 counties over. Far enough that Colton's connections don't mean anything. Eve absorbed this. Go on. There's a woman named Catherine Holloway. She runs an advocacy network. Been doing it for 19 years. She knows how to navigate the legal process, how to find resources, how to keep you safe while things are moving forward. Safe how? Housing. Temporary if you need it. Financial assistance. Counseling. People who have been through what you're going through and came out the other side. Harper looked up from her drawing. Mama, can I get a cookie? Eve reached into her purse, pulled out $2, handed them over. Harper slid off her chair and walked to the counter, her shoes lighting up with each step. When she was out of earshot, Eve said, What does this cost? The lawyer works on a sliding scale. Catherine's organization is funded by grants. You wouldn't pay anything. And what do you get out of this? Nothing. Eve looked at him with an expression that was equal parts skepticism and exhaustion. People don't do this for nothing. I'm not people. Then why? It was the question Garrett had been expecting, the one he had avoided answering the first time she asked. But sitting here in this too bright coffee shop, watching this woman who reminded him so much of his daughter, he decided she deserved the truth. I have a daughter, he said. Her name is Sierra. She's 34, lives in Nashville with her husband and 2 kids. Eve waited. When she was in her late 20s, she was with a man who did to her exactly what Colton is doing to you. Slowly, methodically. And I didn't see it. I was on the road. I was proud. I thought she could handle her own life because anything else felt like I didn't trust her to be an adult. He stopped. The words were harder than he expected. By the time I figured it out, she was in bad shape. Really bad. She tried to end it. Her life in a hospital. After he put her there for something else. Oh God, Eve said quietly. She's okay now. She did the work. Therapy. Support. She put herself back together in a way that I still can't quite believe. But there was a man in Tennessee who spent 3 years tearing her apart, and I wasn't paying attention until it was almost too late. Harper returned with a cookie, climbed back into her seat, resumed her drawing. Garrett looked at Eve. When I saw your arm, I saw Sierra, and I made a decision that I wasn't going to drive away this time. The table was quiet. The noise of the coffee shop continued around them. Espresso machine hissing. Conversations blending into background static. Harper hummed softly as she colored, adding details to what appeared to be a very large cat with wings. Eve's eyes were wet, but she did not cry. She did not have the luxury of that yet. But something in her face changed. A softening. A recognition. What do I have to do, she asked. Garrett opened the notebook, turned it so she could see. These are the steps. First, you meet with Nathaniel. He assesses the case. If you decide to move forward, he files for a protection order through state court. At the same time, Catherine's organization sets you up with temporary housing if you need it. Somewhere Colton can't find you. What about Harper? Custody gets addressed in the same filing. With the documentation, we'll gather medical records, photographs, witness statements. A judge will prioritize her safety. Witness statements from who? People who have seen what's happening, even if they didn't do anything about it. The law doesn't require bystanders to act, but their testimony still matters. Nobody's going to testify against Colton. Not in this town. Garrett leaned back in his chair. You'd be surprised what people will do when they realize it's safe to tell the truth. Eve looked at the notebook, at the names and numbers written there. at the outline of a plan that felt both impossibly complex and impossibly simple. She thought about the house she lived in that was not hers, about the bank account she did not have access to, about Deputy Miller and Uncle Silas, and all the ways Colton had insulated himself against exactly this kind of challenge. Then she thought about Harper, about the way her daughter went quiet when Colton raised his voice, about the fact that an 8-year-old girl should not have to know how to read the temperature of a room to know whether it was safe. She thought about the bruises, the weight loss, the practiced smile, the version of herself that had dissolved so gradually she had not noticed until there was almost nothing left. And she thought about the man sitting across from her who had lost time with his daughter because he had not seen what was happening and who was now trying to make sure she did not lose time with hers. Okay, she said. Just that, one word, but it was enough. Garrett nodded. I need you to understand something. Once we start this, it's going to get harder before it gets better. Colton is going to fight back. He's going to use every connection he has. He's going to try to make you look unstable or vindictive or like you're the problem. You have to be ready for that. I've been ready for 4 years. No, you've been surviving for 4 years. This is different. This is choosing to fight back. And it's going to cost you things. Energy, sleep, maybe some friendships with people who decide it's easier to believe his version than yours. Are you ready for that? Eve looked at Harper, then back at Garrett. Yes. They spent the next hour going through details. What Eve needed to document, where to store evidence so Colton would not find it, how to prepare Harper without frightening her, what to expect in the first meeting with Nathaniel. Catherine Holloway's phone number written on a piece of paper that Eve folded carefully and put in her wallet. When they were done, Harper had filled both sides of the placemat with elaborate drawings and started on a napkin. Can we do this again? Harper asked. I like the cookies here. Maybe, Eve said. We'll see. They stood. Garrett walked them to the parking lot, watched them get into the old Honda Civic with the dented door. Eve rolled down the window. Thank you, she said. You're doing this, Garrett said. I'm just making phone calls. She shook her head. We both know it's more than that. He did not argue, just nodded, stepped back, watched them drive away. Then he got on his bike and rode back to Harrow Creek, already thinking about the next step. The Saturday plan, the confrontation that would force the town to choose a side. The following Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, Ruby's Diner, full breakfast crowd. That was the plan Garrett had proposed, and after 2 days of thinking about it, Eve had agreed. The logic was simple. Colton's power came from the town's silence, from everyone deciding collectively that what happened behind closed doors was not their business, from the unspoken agreement that some people were too important to challenge. If you wanted to break that power, you had to break the silence. And the way to do that was to make the confrontation public, to force people to be witnesses, to make looking away an active choice instead of a passive default. It was risky. Eve understood that. Colton could react badly, could make things worse in the short term, could use the public nature of it to paint her as dramatic or unstable. But Catherine Holloway had been clear. Public accountability was the strongest weapon they had. Once people had heard the truth out loud, once they had been forced to acknowledge what they knew, it became much harder for them to pretend they did not know. Over the course of the week, Garrett and Nathaniel quietly approached people. 3 community members who had seen things over the years, who had noticed and said nothing, but who might, if given the right circumstances, be willing to say something now. Garrett also approached Gus Merrick. It was Thursday morning. Gus was at his usual booth, working through the crossword with his stubby pencil. Garrett slid into the seat across from him without asking. Gus looked up, startled, then wary. We need to talk, Garrett said. I don't think we do. You've been watching her for 2 years. You've seen the bruises, seen the way she flinches, seen what everyone else is pretending not to see. And you've done nothing. Gus set down his pencil. His jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You're a good man, Gus. You spent 20 years working for this county. You know what right looks like. And you've been sitting in this booth watching something wrong happen and telling yourself it's not your business. It's not. Then why does it bother you? Gus did not answer, but his hands resting on the table curled into fists. Saturday morning, Garrett said, 10 o'clock, right here. We're going to have a conversation with Colton Wade, a legal one, with lawyers and advocates and options laid out. And we're going to do it in front of everyone. We need witnesses, people who are willing to say what they've seen. I can't. Why? Because Gus's voice dropped. Because Colton has connections. Because if I cross him, it comes back on me, on my family. That's what he wants you to believe, that he's untouchable. But he's not. Not if enough people stand up at the same time. You're asking me to risk everything. No, I'm asking you to do what you already know is right, what you've known for 2 years. Gus stared at the crossword puzzle, at the half-finished grid, at the small, contained world where the answers were always there if you looked hard enough. I'll think about it, he said finally. That's all I'm asking. Garrett also approached the Carver brothers, found them at their farm working on a tractor that had seen better days. Hank and Eli listened without interrupting as Garrett explained what was happening, what the plan was, what he needed from them. We saw him grab her once, Hank said when Garrett was done. In the parking lot, looked rough. Did you say anything? No. Why not? Hank and Eli exchanged a look. Then Hank said, because we figured it wasn't our place. And how's that working out? The brothers did not answer. I'm not asking you to fight him, Garrett said. I'm asking you to tell the truth about what you saw. That's it. And if he comes after us, then you deal with it the same way Eve's been dealing with it. Except you'll have the whole town watching. Eli, who had been silent up to that point, said, when is this happening? Is Saturday. 10 o'clock. Ruby's. We'll be there, Eli said. Hank looked at his brother, opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, nodded slowly. Yeah, Hank said. We'll be there. By Friday afternoon, Garrett had commitments from 3 people. It was not many, but it was enough. Wednesday through Friday, Eve moved through her days in a state of controlled panic. On the surface, everything was normal. She got Harper ready for school. She went to work. She served coffee and brought plates and smiled at customers and pretended that her world was not about to break open in a way she could not predict. But internally, she was unraveling. What have I agreed to? The question circled through her mind on an endless loop. What happens if this makes things worse? What if Colton uses this against me? What if I lose Harper? What if standing up just gives him an excuse to destroy what little stability we have left? Thursday night was the worst. Colton came home late from a job site, tense and irritable. The atmosphere in the house shifted immediately. That pressure before a storm. Eve moved carefully, spoke softly, tried to anticipate what would set him off and avoid it. But there was no logic to it. No pattern she could follow. His moods were weather, and she was just trying not to drown. He did not hit her that night, but he did not have to. The threat was always there in the set of his shoulders, in the tone of his voice, in the way he looked at her like she was something that belonged to him and could be disposed of if she stopped being useful. She lay awake after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, listening to Harper breathe in the next room. And she thought about running, about taking Harper and driving as far as the Honda Civic would carry them and never looking back. But where would they go? With what money? And how long before Colton found them? Friday morning, she almost called Garrett to cancel. She had his number saved in her phone under a fake name, a precaution Catherine Holloway had suggested. She pulled up the contact, stared at it. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she thought about Sierra, about the woman Garrett had described who had survived and rebuilt and made a life, about the fact that someone had helped her when she needed it, even if Garrett thought he had been too late, about the fact that Harper was watching her, learning from her, absorbing the lesson of whether it was possible to escape or whether you just accepted what you were given. Eve put the phone away. She did not cancel. Saturday morning, she told Colton she had to go in early to help with inventory. It was plausible enough that he did not question it. She dropped Harper at a neighbor's house, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who sometimes watched her on weekends. Then she drove to Ruby's, parked in her usual spot, and sat in the car for 5 minutes trying to breathe. Inside the diner was filling up. Gus at his booth, the Carver brothers at their table, Iris at the register, Garrett at the back booth with Nathaniel Prescott and Catherine Holloway beside him. 3 other people scattered throughout the room, community members who had agreed to be there, to witness. Eve tied her apron with shaking hands, poured coffee, moved through the motions of her job, but she was not serving customers this morning. She was waiting, preparing, gathering every ounce of courage she had left, because in 15 minutes, Colton Wade would walk through that door, and when he did, everything would change. 10:15. The door of Ruby's diner swung open and Colton Wade walked in. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed himself fully protected. Broad shoulders, expensive work boots, the kind of casual assurance that comes from never having been told no in any way that mattered. He scanned the room the way he always did, taking inventory, making sure everyone saw him, and then his eyes landed on the back booth. Garrett Stone, sitting there with 2 people Colton did not recognize. A man in a suit, a woman with a briefcase. The setup was obvious even before Colton processed the details. His eyes moved across the room. Gus Merrick at the window booth, not looking at his crossword for once. The Carver brothers at their usual table coffee, untouched, watching. 3 other people scattered throughout the diner. Familiar faces, people he knew, people who worked for him or whose businesses depended on contracts his company provided, or whose lives intersected with his in the 1,000 small ways that made a town like Harrow Creek function. And then he saw Eve. She was standing at the counter, not serving anyone, not moving, just standing there with a stillness that was entirely different from the stillness of someone afraid. It was the stillness of someone who had made a decision, who had crossed a line inside herself that could not be uncrossed. The room looked at Colton, every face. Gus Merrick, for the first time in 2 years of knowing and doing nothing, did not look down at his crossword puzzle. The Carver brothers sat with their hands folded on the table. Iris stood behind the register with her breath held. The women at the foretop stopped their conversation mid-sentence, all of them, watching. Colton felt it, the shift in the air, the way a room changes when people stop pretending not to see. For just a moment, the confidence flickered. Then he pulled it back, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the back booth. Garrett stood, not aggressively, just a man rising to address someone who had just entered the space. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, Colton," he said. "Let's talk about your options." His voice was calm, no theater, no raised volume, just a statement of fact delivered with the kind of steady authority that did not need to announce itself. Colton stopped, looked at Garrett, looked at the man in the suit, the woman with the briefcase, looked at the room full of people watching this unfold. "I don't take orders from criminals," he said. The man in the suit stood, extended his hand. "Mr. Wade, my name is Nathaniel Prescott. I'm an attorney. I represent Eve Winters. I'd advise you to listen to what we have to say." Colton did not shake the hand, just stared. Nathaniel withdrew his hand unbothered, opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder, set it on the table. What followed was not a fight. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody made threats. It was a conversation conducted in the language of law and documentation and consequences that existed outside the small sphere of Colton Wade's influence. Nathaniel spoke first, laid out the legal situation in clear, unemotional terms. A protection order had been filed in state court. Criminal assault charges were being prepared. There was documentation, photographs, medical records, a pattern of behavior spanning 4 years. Witness statements were being gathered. The case was being handled by people 3 counties over who had no connection to Harrow Creek, no reason to care about Colton's uncle or his contracts or his name on a bench at the recreation center. Colton listened with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You think you can beat me in this county?" "We're not in this county," Nathaniel said. Not legally. This is a state matter now. Catherine Holloway spoke next. She introduced herself, explained that she ran an advocacy network that specialized in exactly this kind of situation, that they had resources, safe housing, legal support, counseling, a structure of protection that would remain in place regardless of what Colton tried to do locally. You've insulated yourself well, she said. The uncle on the planning board, the brother-in-law in the sheriff's office, the contracts that make people hesitant to cross you. But that insulation only works if everyone stays quiet, and that's ending today. Colton's smile faded. Garrett spoke last, briefly, without elaboration. He talked about the relationships that had protected Colton, about the ways those relationships were going to change, about the fact that public exposure had a way of making powerful people suddenly uninterested in extending favors, about the reality that once a case moved into state jurisdiction, local connections became irrelevant. This doesn't have to be a war, Garrett said. You can walk away, accept the protection order, comply with the legal process, make this as painless as possible for everyone involved. Or what Colton said, or it becomes much worse for you much faster. The room was silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator behind the counter and the distant clatter of dishes being washed in the back. Then Eve stepped forward. She had been standing at the counter, hands gripping the edge, listening to Nathaniel and Catherine and Garrett lay out the legal framework. But the legal framework was not why they were here. It was not what the room needed to hear. They needed to hear her voice, her story, the truth that everyone had been carefully not acknowledging for 4 years. She walked to the center of the room, stood there. Colton turned to look at her, and she met his eyes without flinching. I want to say something, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. The room leaned in. Colton stood. Eve, don't do this. Sit down, Nathaniel said. This is between me and her. No, Nathaniel said. It's not. Sit down or leave. Colton looked around the room, at the faces watching him, at Gus Merrick and the Carver brothers, and Iris, and all the people who had looked the other way for years. He sat. Eve took a breath. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her sides where no one could see. Then she spoke. My name is Evelyn Winters. I've worked at this diner for 6 years. Most of you know me. You know my daughter Harper. You know that I'm good at my job, that I show up on time, that I remember your orders and ask about your families and try to make this a place where people feel welcome. She paused. The room was absolutely still. What you might not know is that for the past 4 years, I've been living with a man who hurts me. Someone drew a sharp breath. Eve did not stop. It started small, a raised voice, an argument over something that didn't matter. He apologized, brought me flowers, told me he was under stress at work. I believed him because I wanted to, because he seemed sorry, because the version of him that apologized was the version I had fallen in love with. Her voice was steady. She had practiced this. Not the words exactly, but the act of speaking, of holding herself together long enough to say what needed to be said. Then it happened again. A shove during an argument. More apologies. A gift. An expensive dinner. A period of being kind that made me think maybe it was over. Maybe he had learned. Maybe I had overreacted. She looked at Colton. He was staring at the table, jaw tight. But it wasn't over. It got worse. Slowly. So slowly that I didn't see it happening until I was in the middle of it. A bruise on my arm, then another, then my ribs, then my face. Each time there was an explanation. I had said the wrong thing. I had been in the wrong mood. I had provoked him somehow. And after a while, I started to believe that. Started to think that maybe if I could just be better, quieter, more careful, it would stop. Gus Merrick had tears in his eyes. The Carver brothers were gripping their coffee mugs so hard their knuckles were white. She turned to look at Deputy Miller's supervisor, who was sitting at a table near the door. The man shifted uncomfortably, but did not look away. I thought about the fact that if I tried to leave and failed, it would be worse. That he would use Harper against me. that I would lose her, that I was trapped in a situation where the only way to survive was to stay, to keep my head down, to wait for I don't know what, something to change, someone to see. Her voice broke slightly. She steadied it. And people did see. A lot of you saw. You saw the bruises. You saw the weight I lost. You saw the way I flinched when someone moved too fast. You saw it and you didn't say anything because it wasn't your business. Because getting involved would be complicated. Because Colton Wade is someone important in this town and I'm just a waitress. The silence in the room was crushing. I'm not angry at you for that, Eve said. I understand it. I understand that challenging someone with power is hard, that it's easier to look away, that you have your own lives and your own problems, and this wasn't something you asked to be part of. She paused, looked around the room at each face in turn. But I need you to understand something now. I'm not staying quiet anymore. I'm not pretending this is okay. I'm not waiting for someone else to fix it. I'm standing here in front of all of you and saying out loud what you already know. Colton Wade has been hurting me for 4 years, and it stops today. She pulled her sleeve up, showed the marks on her forearm, the evidence no one could deny. This is from 3 days ago, she said, when he found out I had talked to someone outside of town. When he realized I was planning something, he grabbed my arm and told me that if I didn't drop it, he would make sure I never saw Harper again. She pulled out her phone, pressed play on a recording. Colton's voice filled the diner. Drop this, all of it, or Monday I take Harper and you never see her again. The recording ended. Eve put the phone away. I have 12 recordings like that, she said. Threats, abuse, admissions. I've been documenting everything for months. Photographs with dates, medical records from 3 different hospitals so no one would notice a pattern. A journal with 94 pages describing every incident. I did this because I knew that my word against his wouldn't be enough, that I needed proof, that the system is built to protect men like him and doubt women like me. She turned to Colton. You taught me to be afraid. You taught me to calculate every word and every gesture and every expression to avoid setting you off. You taught me that I was small and powerless and that no one would believe me. But you also taught me to prepare, to gather evidence, to be smarter than you thought I was. Colton's face was red, his hands were clenched, but he said nothing. Eve turned back to the room. I'm done being afraid. I'm done living in a house that isn't mine with a man who treats me like property. I'm done pretending that this is normal or acceptable or something I deserve. And I'm asking you, all of you, to stop pretending too. Her voice rose slightly, not a shout, just emphasis. You saw what was happening. You knew, and you stayed silent because it was easier. I'm not asking you to go back and change that. I'm asking you to do better now. I'm asking you to tell the truth about what you saw, to give statements, to stand up, to make it so that when this goes to court, it's not just my word against his. It's a whole town saying, yes, we saw it. Yes, it happened. Yes, it was wrong. She looked at Gus, at the Carver brothers, at Iris, at every person in that room. Some of you have already agreed to do that. Thank you. The rest of you, you have a choice. You can keep looking away. Or you can help me make sure my daughter grows up in a world where silence doesn't protect the people who hurt us. She stopped. The room was absolutely still. Her hands were shaking beneath her sleeves where no one could see. But her voice had been steady throughout. Every word clear, every detail specific. The room had heard it all. Colton stood, his chair scraped against the floor. He looked at Eve with an expression that was equal parts rage and disbelief. You'll regret this, he said. No, Eve said quietly. I won't. Colton looked around the room one more time, at the faces that would not look away, at the lawyer and the advocate and the man on the motorcycle who had somehow assembled all of this. at the town that had decided collectively and silently that he was no longer untouchable. He walked out, got into his truck, drove away. The silence that followed was different, lighter, like something heavy had been lifted from the air. And then slowly people started to move. Gus Merrick stood, walked over to Nathaniel Prescott, said quietly, "I'll give a statement. I should have done it 2 years ago." The Carver brothers followed. "We saw things," Hank said. "We'll tell you what we saw." Iris came out from behind the register. "I heard things, saw things. I'll testify." One by one, people in the diner approached Nathaniel, gave their names, agreed to be interviewed, agreed to tell the truth about what they had known and done nothing about. Eve stood in the center of the room and watched it happen. This town, this place that had decided her suffering was not its problem, was making a different decision now. Not because they were brave, not because they were good, but because she had forced them to see, had made looking away an active choice instead of a passive default. Catherine Holloway came over, put a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," she said. Eve nodded. She could not speak. If she spoke, she would cry, and she could not afford to cry yet. Garrett caught her eye from across the room, nodded once. She nodded back. It would be satisfying to say that was the end of it, that Colton Wade accepted defeat and walked away, and everyone lived happily ever after. But men like Colton do not fold quietly, and small towns do not transform overnight. Within 48 hours, stories were circulating that Garrett had intimidated witnesses, that the meeting at Ruby's had been coerced, that the motorcycle club was involved in things far worse than asking questions about a domestic situation, that Eve was unstable, vindictive, that she had fabricated evidence and manipulated people, and that the whole thing was a scheme to extort money from a successful businessman. A report was filed with the sheriff's department, not about Colton Wade, about Garrett Stone, harassment, stalking, witness intimidation. The complaint was detailed, professional, the kind of thing that gets taken seriously. For 48 hours, it looked like Garrett's act of kindness was going to cost him everything. Eve panicked, called Catherine. "I made it worse. He's going after Garrett now, and I'm still here, and nothing's changed." Catherine's voice was calm. "Wait, trust the process. I don't know if I can. You can. You already did the hard part. Now we wait for the town to decide." The town decided on Monday morning. Gus Merrick, who had spent 2 years watching and doing nothing, sat down at his kitchen table and wrote a 3-page letter to the county sheriff. It was factual, unemotional, a detailed account of everything he had observed over the past 2 years. The bruises, the weight loss, the way Eve flinched, the way Colton performed normalcy while radiating control. The Friday evening at Ruby's when Colton had made his presence a threat without saying anything overtly threatening. Every detail Gus had filed away and tried to ignore. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "I am ashamed that I did not write this sooner. I am ashamed that I prioritized my own comfort over this woman's safety. But I am writing it now, and I am prepared to testify to everything I have described here." He signed it, mailed it. Then he sat in his kitchen and cried for the first time in 15 years. The Carver brothers went together to Nathaniel Prescott's office, gave statements about the time they had seen Colton grab Eve's arm in the parking lot, about the way she had pulled away, about the look on her face, about the fact that they had talked about it between themselves and decided it was not their business. "We should have said something then," Eli said. "But you're saying something now," Nathaniel replied. "That counts." Iris Tate gave a statement about conversations she had overheard, about the way Colton spoke to Eve when he thought no one was listening, about the bruises she had noticed and the excuses Eve had given and the way the whole diner had collectively agreed not to acknowledge what was happening right in front of them. 3 women who had known Eve for years, who had shared coffee with her and complimented her earrings and asked about Harper's school projects, came forward with their own observations. Small things. A comment Colton had made, a moment when Eve had seemed particularly scared, the time one of them had asked about a bruise, and Eve had said she had bumped into a door and they had both known it was a lie, but neither had pushed. And then there was the neighbor, the one who had called in the noise complaint 14 months earlier, the one whose call had brought Deputy Miller to the house, who had watched him leave without doing anything, who had felt guilty ever since. She gave the most detailed statement of all: times, dates, sounds she had heard through the shared wall, the crash of breaking glass, raised voices, Eve crying, the patrol car arriving, the deputy leaving 20 minutes later without making an arrest. The way the neighborhood had gone quiet after that, like everyone had decided that if the police were not going to help, there was no point in anyone else trying. The statements went to the county sheriff, to the state attorney general's office, to Nathaniel Prescott, who compiled them into a file that was 3 inches thick. On Wednesday, the sheriff made a decision. He opened an investigation, not into Garrett Stone, into Colton Wade. The report about Garrett was quietly shelved, not dismissed, just set aside pending the outcome of the investigation into the domestic violence allegations. By Friday, the story had shifted. It was no longer about a biker harassing a local businessman. It was about a pattern of abuse that had been ignored by a town that should have known better. Over the following weeks, things moved. Not fast, not cleanly, but they moved. The legal process took months. Colton was charged with assault, coercion, witness intimidation. His uncle Silas Wade resigned from the county planning board amid questions about conflicts of interest and inappropriate influence. Deputy Miller faced an internal review. The contracts that had made Colton Wade feel necessary to the town's economy were suspended pending investigation. None of it was fast or perfectly clean. Real justice rarely is. There were setbacks, delays, moments when it seemed like the whole thing would collapse under the weight of Colton's connections and money and willingness to fight. But it moved, and Eve was safe while it moved, which was the thing that mattered most. On a Wednesday afternoon in November, 3 women from Catherine Holloway's advocacy network and 2 members of Garrett's motorcycle club showed up at the house on the east side of town with a truck and 4 hours of labor. They were impeccably well-behaved by all accounts, polite, efficient. They loaded Eve's belongings and Harper's belongings and nothing that belonged to Colton, and they moved everything to a small rental on Maple Street. The rental was modest: 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with appliances that worked, a living room with windows that faced south and let in good light. The neighbors had already been spoken to. They were the kind of people willing to notice things, to call if something seemed wrong, to be, in Catherine's words, a soft network of safety. Harper had her own room. She decorated it with her drawings, horses mostly, some cats, a few elaborate landscapes that showed a child's understanding of perspective and color. Eve stood in the doorway and watched her daughter arrange her things and thought about how simple it was, how impossible it had seemed a month ago, and how simple it actually was once the structures were in place. That night, after Harper was asleep, Eve sat in the small living room, surrounded by boxes, and cried. Not from sadness, not from fear, from relief, deep, shaking, exhausting relief. For the first time in 4 years, she was in a space that was hers, where she could lock the door and know that the person on the other side of it had no right to enter, where she could breathe without calculating, where she could exist without performing. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she made herself a cup of tea and sat in the quiet and felt, for the first time in a very long time, safe. On a Friday morning before November ended, Garrett Stone came into Ruby's diner one last time. He sat at the back booth, the same one he had occupied for weeks. Iris brought him coffee without asking. Black. Then she brought biscuits with gravy. He ate slowly, not because he was savoring it, but because he was in no hurry to leave. Eve was working. She moved through the room with the same efficiency she always had, but there was something different about her now, a lightness. Not happiness, not yet, but the absence of the weight she had been carrying. It showed in the way she held her shoulders, the way she smiled at customers, the way she laughed at something Gus said. When the morning rush ended, she brought Garrett a refill, set the pot down on the table, sat across from him in the booth. "Thank you," she said. Garrett shook his head. "You did that. I just made some phone calls. We both know it's more than that." He did not argue, just nodded. "How's Sierra?" Eve asked. Garrett looked up. Surprised she remembered. "She's good. She's real good. Talked to her last night. Told her about you." "What did she say?" "She said to tell you that you're stronger than you know, and that Harper is lucky to have you." Eve's eyes filled. She blinked the tears back. "Tell her thank you. Tell her that someone she doesn't know is glad she's okay." "I'll tell her." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The diner around them was ordinary. People eating breakfast, conversations about weather and work and small concerns. The world continuing as it always did. "You leaving?" Eve asked. "Yeah, tomorrow morning." "Where are you headed?" "Nashville. Going to see Sierra and the grandkids." "That's good." "Yeah, it is." Garrett finished his coffee, left two 20s on the table for a meal that cost $12. Stood, walked toward the door. Eve followed him out to the parking lot. The air was cold, the sky was gray. His motorcycle sat where it had been parked every morning for weeks. "If you're ever back this way," she said, "I'll stop in." "Good." He swung his leg over the bike, started the engine. The sound was loud and rough and familiar. He looked at her one more time. "You're going to be okay," he said. "I know." He rode away. Down the gravel lot, onto Main Street. Harrow Creek watched him go. There is a story we tell ourselves about the kind of people who protect others. We make them simple, uncomplicated, clean backgrounds, clear motivations. Heroes in the traditional sense with nothing messy or difficult or contradictory about them. Garrett Stone did not fit that story. He was a complicated man from a complicated world. He had a patch on his vest that made people cross the street. He had done things in his life that would not stand up well under scrutiny. He carried a private grief about a daughter he had almost lost because he had not been paying attention when it mattered. But he had walked into a diner in a town that had decided a young woman's suffering was not its concern, and he had decided otherwise. He had made phone calls, built structures, gathered people, created the conditions under which the truth could be told and believed. That is what courage looks like. It does not wait for the right person. It does not arrive in the expected package. It shows up in a back booth with black coffee. It sees what everyone else has been carefully not seeing, and it makes a phone call. Harrow Creek is a different town now. Not transformed, not unrecognizable. Different in the way communities change when they are forced to look at themselves honestly, with a clarity that is uncomfortable at first and then slowly and quietly becomes something worth being proud of. The diner still serves the same biscuits. Gus Merrick still works his crossword at the window booth. The Carver brothers still tip exactly 12%. But there is something else there now too, a knowledge, an acknowledgement. The understanding that silence has a cost and that the cost is borne by the people who can least afford to pay it. And somewhere in Harrow Creek, there is a little girl named Harper, drawing horses on placemats. She is in second grade. She likes art class and recess and the fact that her mother smiles more now than she used to. She does not fully understand everything that happened. She will someday, but for now she is safe, and that is everything. 6 months later, Colton Wade pleaded guilty. 3 years in prison, his uncle resigned. The contracts evaporated. Eve became manager of Ruby's Diner, night classes, therapy, slowly rebuilding what isolation had taken. Harper joined the art club, made friends stop flinching at Ray's voices. She drew horses and cats and a man on a motorcycle with wings. And in Nashville, Tennessee, Garrett Stone sat in his daughter's kitchen while his grandchildren played in the next room. Sierra poured him coffee, asked about the road, about where he had been. "Harrow Creek," he said, "little town a few hours north. What were you doing there helping someone?" Sierra smiled. She knew what that meant, knew her father well enough to read between the lines. "They okay now?" "Yeah, they're okay," good Sierra said. "That's really good." She reached across the table, squeezed his hand. And Garrett, who had carried the weight of being too late for so many years, felt something shift. Not absolution, not quite, but maybe the beginning of understanding that sometimes being there when it matters is enough. That you cannot undo the past, but you can choose to show up for the present. That courage is not about being perfect. It is about being willing. And somewhere folded carefully in his wallet was a drawing. A little girl's rendering of a man on a motorcycle with wings, crayon and marker on paper. Imperfect, beautiful. A reminder that small acts have consequences, that showing up matters, that seeing people really seeing them can change everything. Harrow Creek continues. Seasons change, people come and go, life moves forward the way it always does. But something fundamental shifted that Saturday morning in Ruby's diner. The town learned that silence is a choice, that looking away is a decision, that protection and complicity are separated by the thinnest of lines, in which side you fall on defines who you are. And in a small rental on Maple Street, a mother and daughter are building a life. It is not perfect. It is not without struggle, but it is theirs. It is safe. And every morning when Eve wakes up, she does not have to calculate how to survive the day. She just lives it. And that simple, ordinary freedom is worth everything they went through to get here. Harper is drawing horses. Eve is making breakfast. The sun is coming through the window. And somewhere out there on some highway, Garrett Stone is riding toward whatever comes next, carrying his grief and his code and his belief that when you see someone who needs help, you do not look away. You do what you can. You make the call. You show up. Because that is what separates the people who change things from the people who let them stay broken. That is what courage looks like. And it is enough.